standalone solar farm at 63 megawatts. In 2016, it started the first Philippine solar panel factory. In 2017, it plans to construct a total of 500 megawatts in projects and the world's largest off-grid portfolio. And in 2018, they came to ACEF. So, and by the way, this is an advertisement. This is another new energy leader for 2018. And Leandro, you have the floor.
IEA chief economist Laszlo Varro yesterday opened the forum by showing that solar is not growing as fast as many believe and has not lived up to the promise of revolutionizing the energy industry. Mr. Varro made a good point. After all the promises we've heard in previous ACEFs, solar continues to contribute not much more than 2% of global energy supply and is forecast to grow to just 10% by 2040. As we end this Asia Clean Energy Forum, I ask all of you, will we let the status quo prevail? Will we allow renewables to remain a marginal share of the energy mix? Or will we take from this conference a new sense of urgency? Will we convince the ADB to replace incrementalism with radicalism? Will we mark today as the beginning of a new clean energy revolution? Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you today a simple solution that requires no new technology and will cost the world less than the status quo source of energy. It will solve the problems of 1 billion people without electricity, over 3 billion without adequate electricity, and over 7 billion affected by climate change. You see, the private sector's traditional role is to implement policies by government, and ADB's is to advise governments in hope they reach an enlightened decision. Unfortunately, governments can't be counted upon to be enlightened. And if we leave it up to them, my generation may never live to be as old as you. The problem is that energy policy is more often driven by politics rather than markets. Such that even if solar is already at 3 to 6 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour on average around the world, and should comprise at least 20% of the global energy mix, it's still at a fraction of that. And even when it should in the future comprise 50 to 80% of the energy mix, is still being forecast at just 10%. This is the difference that politics makes when it distorts free markets. So the solution is to expand the role of the private sector from merely following the government to leading the way for the government to initiate the right policies by doing things first, asking forgiveness before asking permission, which shouldn't really be a controversial position. This is how all great Silicon Valley companies operate. They've reached large scales of operation, financing their businesses through third parties. And yet, for some reason, the energy industry has been so used to being heavily regulated, so used to being so structured, with sources of capital being so risk-averse. For as much as solar has been hyped as a disruptive technology, it has largely been applied conventionally, through the grid, through utilities, through regulators. And only if this disruptive technology is applied disruptively will we be able to realize the potential of solar. And I'll give you 3 ways how. The Philippines had a solar feed-in tariff until March of 2016 at 17 US dollar cents per kilowatt hour, after which developers, policymakers, and bankers believed that solar would be dead until the next round of subsidies. Rather than wait for subsidies, our strategy was to become ASEAN's first vertically integrated solar company. We opened the largest Southeast Asian-owned solar panel factory, built our now 750-person team to develop, construct, and operate solar farms at 40% lower cost than the market average. And whenever policymakers and financial institutions make their forecasts on the future energy mix, never believe the median market price. Take the lowest price in the market. If the market is indeed going to be efficient, the lowest price should be the price at which it clears. So we have since signed contracts for 300 megawatts of solar farms at as low as 5.7 US cents per kilowatt hour. The lowest cost of solar energy in Southeast Asia, the lowest of any power in the Philippines today, and around 50% lower than the average cost of coal in the Philippines today. Our claim is that even with the additional cost of storage, we can deliver not only peaking, but even 24-hour baseload power at a lower cost than any coal power plant in the Philippines that has not yet begun construction today. The way that this will work is that solar is going to replace the more expensive fuels like diesel and gas first, which happen to operate during the day, requiring less storage. Only after, let's say, 5 years of eliminating all the diesel and all the gas in the Philippines, will we need to have enough batteries to run these solar farms 24/7. At which point, our claim is that with, let's say, by then 5 cents per kilowatt hour US cents solar energy, you'll be able to deliver baseload solar energy with storage at below 10 cents. It's not a mystery what cost of storage you need to solve backwards for to make those numbers work. At $150 per kilowatt hour or less, which is only 40% below current market prices, we will be at that point, resulting therefore in billions of dollars in stranded assets, which I hope this bank will not hold any of. This is something that hopefully ADB will consider, as it advises not only the government on coal policy, but also on its current plans to construct a new LNG terminal. ADB, please do the right thing, and note that gas is not a transition fuel for any economy if it is under a take or pay contract. The current gas contracts in the Philippines are pushing out renewables. And if it does not advise the Philippine government to stop any plans for take or pay gas contracts, it will postpone the renewable energy generation revolution for another generation. Please also note that coal is not a necessity. There are viable alternatives to it anywhere on this planet where the sun shines. So the next time that someone says that I'm sorry, but emerging markets need coal, ADB, please take a decisive opposition to the construction of any more coal power plants anywhere in the world. Seems like the ADB agrees. The fact that solar is already cheaper than coal alone does not solve the problem. We hope that with lower rates, utilities would be lining up to sign contracts to lower the cost of electricity for their consumers. Instead, utilities have started saying in their bids that to qualify, you need to have a diesel generator from Europe or another G7 country. Or you need to be anything except solar. This is not a joke. There are bids now in the Philippines because of the low price of solar that say any technology except solar. Or you need to be a 414 megawatt gas plant in existence as of January 2018 to qualify. And there is only one company in the Philippines that owns an existing 414 megawatt gas plant, and its office is very near here. So when I asked the president of a certain utility whose office is also very near here, why did you have to contract at 50% higher than the cost of solar energy? He told me, young man, it's because in the Philippines, everyone has to be happy. It's because everyone needs to have their share. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the Philippines has the highest cost of electricity in Southeast Asia, the smallest manufacturing base, and the highest incidence of poverty among major ASEAN economies. But the Philippines is also, fortunately, one of two countries in ASEAN with an electricity spot market. So we can sell our power without a PPA at the prevailing market price. The problem, however, is that Philippine banks don't want to finance merchant power projects, even if today's prices on the spot market are 30 to 50% higher than our contracted price. So alongside the 100 megawatt contracted solar farm that we are now constructing, we're adding an additional 50 megawatt merchant piece that we have to inject additional equity to because banks don't want to lend against uncontracted cash flows. We are developing 5 more gigawatts of this stuff that may end up being contracted or hopefully can even be financed on a merchant basis, which we believe will all but ensure that regardless of whether they have contracts, new coal power plants will not be viable as wholesale market prices are depressed by the advent of more solar energy. If we succeed, we can stop these coal power plants before they start construction. We can decarbonize the economy, lower the cost of electricity, and reduce poverty in the Philippines. And all we need is a bank with the same objectives that's willing to finance projects on a merchant basis, in case you have any ideas. And we believe that this has potential far beyond the Philippines. Imagine how many times you've heard developers in Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, and Vietnam say, there's so much potential for solar energy, but the national utility doesn't want to buy more of it. In markets without a spot market, we can simulate what a spot market is like by submitting unsolicited proposals and constructing those plants even before utilities accept proposals, prompting them into action. If someone built the first phase of a 100 megawatt solar farm, offering the power at 30% lower than their average cost of generation, do you really think PLN, TNB, EVN, or IGAT would reject that offer? I think not. And I think that will unleash the floodgates for solar energy across Southeast Asia. But microgrids are, I believe, an even more radical solution to disrupt the ASEAN power industry. Traditionally, microgrids have been highly subsidized and regulated, with perhaps the highest ratio of conferences on any topic relative to actual megawatts installed. What all the talk of distributed solar energy ending poverty is missing is that subsidies are unnecessary and that the market's deregulation alone can solve the problem if there were enough willing capital to take this risk. We can eradicate energy poverty by next decade if governments stop subsidizing utilities and prohibiting third parties from selling electricity. So last year, we were approached by the residents of Paluan, Occidental Mindoro, the town with the worst electric service on the island with among the worst electric service in the Philippines. Their town was abandoned by the rural electric cooperative that has an exclusive franchise supposedly to sell power in this town, because that cooperative was losing money. So they asked us to establish a solar battery microgrid to deliver uninterrupted 24-hour power for the first time in the town's history. When the franchised cooperative heard about it, they were incensed. Privately, they conceded this is good for the people. But they didn't want to waive their franchise because they worried that if Paluan showed that cheaper, better service were possible, it would be a domino effect for the rest of the island, perhaps the rest of the country, to demand the same service. In response, however, to the clamor of the people, through our newly formed social enterprise, Solar para sa Bayan, or Solar for the People, we constructed the world's largest unsubsidized rural microgrid, supplying 20,000 people without a single dollar of grant money or debt financing. This is 100% equity financed, and while we could have asked the government for subsidies to sell at 80 cents per kilowatt hour, as many other microgrids are doing, we are selling at a true all-inclusive cost of 20 cents per kilowatt hour in this town right now. but admittedly losing money on doing so. However, as we scale these operations and help increase energy demand in this town, we're also expanding these projects across a dozen other towns as we speak. We're going to switch on 2 other towns by the end of this month. In the 3rd or early part of the 4th quarter this year, we will be bringing 24-hour power for the first time in history for 500,000 people across a dozen towns. Again, without a single dollar of grant money. Which we hope will cause ADB to rethink its entire off-grid energy strategy and stop giving grant money to small, unviable projects. So the first key thing here is that we happen to be investors with a long-term horizon. Rather than trying to squeeze as much profit from consumers, the government, or ADB, we're partnering with communities to give the best service at the lowest cost, in hopes that the next generation of Filipinos will have a standard of living and electric consumption comparable to Americans of today, by which time our projects will of course be very profitable. We are in the business of ending poverty. The interests of the communities are our interests, and we hope that with the help of some of the people in this room, we can rapidly scale this, not just to 500,000 people, but to millions by next year. And the second key thing is that with private sector initiative, we don't need to depend on government laying out the red carpet, and rather use this as a way to show government the right way to do it. We're financing these projects on 100% equity because we believe that this is going to accelerate better government policy in off-grid areas in the Philippines, by which time these would hopefully be more financeable. And the only thing, therefore, standing between us and scaling this to millions more is access to debt financing so that our balance sheet will not be so strained. And if you know of anyone that can offer financing for off-grid projects in Asia Pacific, please let us know. So, on one last point, this is a bit more fanciful, but if you will indulge it. I started this company in 2013, when the largest solar installation in the Philippines was on this building's rooftop, which ABB was buying power from at around 30 US cents per kilowatt hour. I didn't think that that was the true price. That is the result of an early, inefficient supply chain. So from the start, this has been a vertically integrated company doing EPC and development in-house, and recently adding manufacturing. Today, we're selling solar power to rooftop customers from 7 to 10 US cents per kilowatt hour, while Filipinos pay 16 to 24 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. And yet, solar panels are conspicuously still absent from perhaps 99% of rooftops in the Philippines. The problem is not just economics. The problem is that utilities are making it as difficult as possible to install solar rooftop in the Philippines by making applying for net metering as cost prohibitive and time consuming as possible, by pushing for more restrictions, making it illegal to sell electricity without a retail electricity supply license. While friends of utilities have filed a case in the Supreme Court that has caused the halting of granting of more licenses so that no new company can legally sell solar energy in the Philippines today. This is exactly why I don't believe in solar rooftop, because it still needs to be coupled with utilities, and why I believe in microgrids, which instead can replace utilities. But what about places like Manila? We can't just build a 100-megawatt solar farm right next to the ADB. There's got to be another option beyond working with utilities and replacing utilities. Like, for example, buying out and taking over utilities. The Manila Electric Utility, or Meralco, is one of the largest privately owned distribution utilities in Asia, with a market capitalization of around $7 billion. With just $2 billion of equity and a little acquisition financing, something that I'm sure ADB can arrange, a consortium of investors could buy control of Meralco and change everything about the Philippine power industry overnight. It could start, for instance, by canceling the 5,000 megawatts of coal plants that Meralco either owns or is contracted with. It could become the world's first distributed generation utility, turning the entire Metro Manila into a microgrid of 20 million people and 10,000 megawatts of demand. With the rooftop solar installations, behind-the-meter storage, demand-side management devices, and all these other innovations, turning this into a champion for energy innovation around the world. And in doing all this, electrify all transportation while it's at it, lowering the cost and decarbonizing the electricity supply of the Philippines, accelerating its industrialization, and reducing energy poverty. Now, these ideas have been lengthily discussed by the people that run these utilities and their consultants. But the reason it hasn't happened, even if it can, is that it would be far more profitable than running a traditional and coal-powered utility. But that ultimately, it comes down to the fact that innovation is not in the DNA of utilities. And many of them have vested interests, if not direct business interests, in coal and gas power supply companies. So how can you expect them to cannibalize their own children? So either someone else will build microgrids to replace utilities, even in major cities like Manila, or more enterprising management comes in. So if anybody here wants to start a private equity fund that buys out inefficient electric utilities in the emerging world and converting them into microgrids with renewable energy, let me know. So now let's get back to reality. These are all wonderful ideas, but not something that would only be nice for us to do, but something that I believe we are morally obligated to do. Of the over 7 billion people around the world, only a small fraction have been given the opportunity to end climate change and energy poverty to the degree of many of the people in this room. If we wanted to, we could make it happen. ADB could very easily make it happen. And conversely, if we weren't in our seats today, someone else would be. And if we didn't spend billions of dollars on programs that didn't make much of an impact, that money could be better spent on other things. Our failure, therefore, to find solutions that make a larger impact is the very problem we should solve. Climate change isn't just an academic issue in the Philippines. It is a personal issue for the many Filipinos that have lost family or lost livelihood to weather events. And energy poverty more so deprives 100 million Filipinos that have to contend with expensive and unreliable electricity every day, depriving them of the benefits of industrialization and better employment and quality of life. It is with this that I hope the ADB will start to rethink its entire energy policy starting today. Thank you.